and go home in peace.
Welcome everybody to this European Feltrinelli Camp Next Generation Labor. Next Generation Labor, as many of you probably already know, is one of 3 European Feltrinelli Camp organized by Fondazione Feltrinelli in 2021 in collaboration with the national and international universities, research centers and institutional stakeholders. Next Generation Labor intends to focus on the proposals that can help rethink active labor policies to favor the matching between supply and demand and build a less polarized and more inclusive labor market. The focus of the camp is to find a better way for these measures to comply or to choose different measures, trying to find some integration with other measures of public policy, to use case studies that can be innovative and can intervene in the main field of policy and can be an enhancement in respect to the policy measure proposed. This is the moment to welcome our first guest and the person who will do the first speech in this beginning of the European Feltrinelli Camp Next Generation Labor, Ivana Pais from Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore di Milano. Yes, and we will now have in a link with Eleanor Wahal. Welcome to her. Welcome. We can see her in the screen. Can we clap our hands to her also and make her welcome? Thank you for being with us. Eleanor Wahal from the École Normale Supérieure Paris-Soclé will tell us how we reached this point, how we arrived to this particular result and this camp. Please.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for being here. Unfortunately, I cannot be there with you in person. So I'm Eleanor Val. I'm a member of the scientific board of this event, and I would like to introduce you a bit to this event and especially how we got there, what was the work behind this particular event. As a matter of fact, this Feltrinelli camp represents, I would say, the final phase of a much longer work that we have done this year around the themes of work and the future of work and the different implications for workers and social protection and rights more generally. So in particular, this year, we have focused on these issues with 2 initiatives. So first of all, we had a series of workshops on humans and the machine. And secondly, we had a cycle of conferences, which is still taking place, on the future of work and rights and politics for Europe. So it's called OK Europe. So with respect to the first series of events, so humans and machines, what we did is that we had different workshops with where we gathered many experts and stakeholders with different backgrounds and experiences. And we heard from them, and we collectively thought about what are the challenges of digitalization, especially with respect to the context of Italy, and what are also good cases, good practices, case studies that we can look at to have a better idea of what policy practices we can adopt to actually better adapt our policies towards the labor market that is changing. So with this, within this cycle of events, we highlighted, of course, many challenges that are occurring today in the Italian labor market. I can cite just a couple of them just to give you an idea. So we talked about the need to invest more in R&D because contrary to other European countries, in Italy, this is really an issue at the moment. And we also talked about the need to adapt university education as well as high school training to facilitate the entrance of young people in the labor market. We also looked at some case studies, as I mentioned before, and we talked especially about the role of UBI, or what it's called in Italy, reddito di cittadinanza, and its impact on the labor market and the experience of Italian workers. As well as the role of public-private partnerships in the management of public employment centers. We then had this cycle of conferences called OK Europe. So we had an event in Barcelona in the 22nd of September, then in Paris on the 1st of November. And we have a couple of other events in Brussels on the 16th of November and in Berlin on the 23rd of November. I'll speak just very briefly about the event in Paris because I was part of the event. I participated in the organization and the development of the event. So on this particular event, we talked about the future of the labor markets in Europe with a European outlook, and the role of technology, how the technological revolution is shaping that future. So we had a workshop in the afternoon with experts with, again, different backgrounds and different roles. And on the evening, we had a public conference on this issue. So again, we highlighted some challenges with this respect, especially in terms of precarization for workers, as well as the difficulty in providing adequate social protection, as well as the need to upskill certain workers that are already within the labor market. But we also talked about opportunities in terms of openings of new jobs, but also the role of the cooperative model, as well as the open source model for technology. So those are the issues that we talked about, and yeah, of course, those issues brought up to today. So thank you very much.
That's very clear. Thank you very much to Elena Wahal. Now I introduce again Ivana Pais from University Cattolica del Sacro Cuore di Milano. She's going to talk about what we expect from this camp.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. It's really nice to be here, in part face-to-face, in part in a hybrid form, as we are used now to do. And we are a researcher from all over the world. Some of us are Italian researcher, but working abroad, and now it's nice to have this occasion to be back and share experience, opinion, knowledge, and ideas. So we are ready for a very intense 2-day workshop. It will be really intense, and I hope it will be really rich and provocative and rich of new ideas and new point of view. So in this 2-day, we will work through 3 main objects, knowledge objects: labor policies, educational tools and welfare. And we have 7 guiding questions, but I think I won't read it because we have the occasion later during our working groups. I will just read the titles of the working groups. The first is about co-determination of workers in corporate governance. The second, enhancement of the Competence Center for Scientific Innovation. Third, the reform of employment services. Then knowledge district to connect training and the labor market. Modular basic income and guaranteed job plans, and guaranteed minimum income. So we will work in these 6 working groups, and the idea is, the aim of this meeting is to rethink, as you said, active labor policies to favor the matching between supply and demand, and build, in particular, less polarized and more inclusive labor market, in particular, facing the new technological changes. So we will focus on that. I think that I provided enough information to start with, and the rest will come, and I hope will surprise us in these 2 days. And yeah, I hope it will be nice to be together.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Ivana Pais, who's going to stay with us. In the meantime, we have already said goodbye to Elena Wahal, that did the first speech of this camp. And now is for the first plenary session of this particular camp. There will be many plenary sessions during these 2 days. It's going to be a moment in which everybody can find some material, some ideas, some issues that can help in the work of the different tables and the different groups which will work together. The idea is to have a dialogue, in this case in particular with between Ivana Pais and our next guest, and to enhance and somehow push forward all the reflections and what will be the work of these 2 days. So let's introduce the first, as I say, plenary session, which is entitled, or better, sorry, this is a false friend in Italian, it's not entitled, which is named New Workers in a Changing Labor Market. And so let me introduce Sara Abdelnour. Hello, thank you for being with us. I keep on watching the big video, but you're in front of me, so nice to have you with us. From the Université Paris-Dauphine, European Network on Digital Labor Sociologist is she, of work, and she studies platform economy and their effects on employment. She's a PI of CAPLA project on the social structure of platform capitalism and employment categories and forms of labor organization. Among her publications, Moi, Petite Entreprise, Les auto-entrepreneurs, de l'utopie à la réalité et les nouveaux prolétaires. Welcome to this camp. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
I know you have prepared also some slides for us, which somehow will go along with your speech. So we will watch and listen.
Yeah, sure. I will share my screen, and you won't see me anymore, I think.
Okay. You can start whenever you want.
Oh, okay, for some reason, I can't share my
That's
slides.
typical.
Okay, sorry. I will open them again, and hopefully I will find them. Okay, it seems to work.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I will start. Thank you very much for receiving me first. I think the 2 days will actually be intense. And I'm really sorry I couldn't make it physically with you. And also I'm sorry in advance for studying mainly the case of France. But I'm hoping and I'm sure the discussion will bring the Italian case and other cases in Europe and elsewhere. So I will start with statistics that illustrate the re-emergence of self-employment in France. This expression, re-emergence of self-employment, is the title of a book that was coordinated by Aram and Muller and published in 2004. But the data I'm going to show you now is more recent. It shows, well, actually, it does not show my first point. It does not show the slight increase of self-employment in the 1980s. The slight increase of independent workers, but it shows the stagnation then in the early 2000s and the strong increase that took place since 2009. I'm going to tell you more about this. And the re-emergence of self-employment is both quantitative but also symbolic. And the social meaning of self-employment has changed. It's no longer called independent contracting or travail indépendant, as we say in French, but it has been relabeled as entrepreneurship. And I already mentioned that I know the case of Italy is different from France because historically there have been higher rates of self-employment in Italy, and some previous experiences like the parasubordinati. Maybe we will talk about that. So in France, it's not only a digital boom, but it's also a political reinvestment of this question. And the data I've just showed you is the result of a wide movement consisting in circumventing the status of employment. And this movement has been politically encouraged and can obviously be understood as at the benefit of companies. If we go back in history, in France, the political incentives toward independent work appeared at the end of the 1970s under Raymond Barre's government. As a prime minister and also minister of the economy, he created an allowance for unemployed starting a business, allowance that still exists. This was designed for unemployed executives who are supposed to create businesses and create jobs for other people. There's this sentence that Raymond Barre is supposed to have said at a meeting: the unemployed could try to create their own business instead of just receiving unemployment benefits.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt you. Could you talk a bit louder? Because not seeing you means that it's a bit more difficult to follow what you say.
Okay, sure, I will try.
Thanks.
This was the first moment at the end of the 1970s. Another important moment is the one I studied, is in 2009, when Hervé Novelli, who's also a member of the same political family, liberal rights, and member of government, takes over the file. In 2009, he implements the auto-entrepreneur regime designed to incite self-employment. This time, it targets a less privileged audience by encouraging self-employment for the unemployed or the working poor. So it's supposed actually to be for everyone. Novelli describes the regime as a status of social pacification. And even more, not without cynicism, he likes to say that Marx would be happy to see people liberated from the wage system. Novelli is not one of the political actors who encouraged the rise of self-employment. And he also allowed the development of Uber and other platforms by opening the cab sector to the competition in 2008. So he's actually one of the main characters I study in my work. The promoters of self-employment are to be found in the political sphere, but also surely among the companies which subcontract their activities to self-employed workers. And the interesting common point is the use of a social justification. Self-employment is described as helping the unprivileged access work and wages. And even dignity, if we listen to what Emmanuel Macron said during the campaign of 2016, as he said, our collective defeat is that neighborhoods where Uber hires is where we know nothing to offer them. Them is the people living in the neighborhoods. The truth is that they sometimes work 60 or 70 hours to earn the minimum wage, but they gain dignity. And self-employment is also presented as fostering freedom and autonomy. If we listen to the CEO of Uber in France, who said recently, we didn't create the model around salaried employment. That's not how the platform works or what the drivers want. So now some elements on the situation of auto-entrepreneurs in France. And then I will talk a bit about platform workers. One striking figure, 90% of the auto-entrepreneurs earn less than the minimum wage. And this figure is all the more problematic since half of these workers have no other source of income or status. What struck me while investigating on the auto-entrepreneur is to discover the small proportion of people who were actually in a process of business creation. Most of them were much more involved in a job search process. And therefore, the first users of the regime are the employers, much more than the auto-entrepreneurs themselves. And when I say employers, I think about private companies which seek to avoid social security contributions, but also the public sector. I, for example, investigated a ministerial research department that had its project managers work under the status of auto-entrepreneur. And how do the auto-entrepreneurs cope with the precariousness of their working status? Well, mostly by relying on the wage system, by keeping another job, for example, and or by relying on their relatives. One last point, auto-entrepreneurs are therefore rarely real entrepreneurs. However, they experience what independent work means. This means working long hours and feeling that their income is strictly related to the amount of work they provide. And we can wonder about the political effect of this experience. Independent workers are peculiar voters in that they vote significantly more to the right than the rest of the workforce. The auto-entrepreneurs experience a shift in their relation to the state, to social and fiscal contributions, and are progressively disengaged from collective structures. Their income is no longer governed by collective rules, and they are no longer represented by unions, for example. So this could be a point of discussion to see the political effects of the transformation of the labor status. A last section on platform workers. Obviously, a diversity of workers carry out their activity on digital platforms. We were able to study different situations in the CAPLA research program that you mentioned. CAPLA stands for Capitalisme de Plateforme. And so I had the pleasure to coordinate this research program. And among other platforms, we were able to study drivers, for whom driving is most often the main activity in France, which is not really the case in the United States, for example. Delivery drivers, who are more and more becoming full-time delivery drivers as well, as a recent study showed. There were more students at the beginning, but now more and more the workers are full-time workers. And crowd workers or micro workers who only earn a few euros per month. They found the drivers. This data showed that the platform drivers earn less than half of what their cab counterparts earn. Well, actually, sorry, it's not in the data, it's not the sentence below the numbers. I think there's probably no need to say now how much their autonomy is unreal. Journalists, sociologists, and now judges agree that drivers are highly subject to the demands, controls, and sanctions of platforms. So maybe we'll talk more about this in the discussion, but I think maybe now it's quite almost common knowledge to think that they are not autonomous in their activity. And maybe some data on the extreme weakness of the crowd workers' income. The colleagues working on the crowd working platform in France showed large variations in the working time. But beyond those differences, all the crowd workers only earn a few euros each month. You can see the very small percentage of crowd workers who earn more than 50 euros per month, and most of them earn less than 5 euros per month. So now a word of conclusion about the struggles and the resistance against this new labor regime. In France, we can still observe a political support to the platforms. Platform workers have made their appearance in the labor code, but paradoxically as independent contractors. And the government keeps denying platform workers the status of employees. Actually, it does a lot of things to deny them the status of employees. However, there have been in France, as in many other countries, legal decisions to requalify platform workers as employees. In France, two major decisions were rendered by the Cour de Cassation, which is the equivalent of the Supreme Court. One in November 2018, requalifying a bike delivery worker as an employee, and the other in March 2020, requalifying an Uber driver. These decisions were the result of lawsuits brought by workers, often accompanied by unions and defended by activist lawyers. In the coming month, trials will also be held against the platform at the initiative of Labour Inspector. This is an interesting issue to follow since it will be criminal prosecution, and it will involve not only the plaintiffs, but many more workers, all the workers gathered in the file that was put together by the labor inspectors. And of course, last but not least, seen of resistance, the social movements of workers who try and defend their rights, their minimal income and social protection. That was one of the subjects we investigated with my colleague Sophie Bernard, the social movements of Uber drivers in France. I think I have no time left to go into details, but maybe we'll talk more about that during the discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sarah. And Sarah Abdelnour, now after this first part of her speech, will now have a dialogue with Ivana Pais. There are many issues that have come up through what Sarah Abdelnour has told us. So to Ivana to start this dialogue.
Yeah. I cannot see Sarah anymore, but I will speak with
We will wait
I
to
hope
see her again on the screen.
I hope she's there.
I'm here. I'm sorry. I ended the sharing of my screen, but did not go back on screen.
Maybe we can ask to our technical department if we can make something about the reappearance of Sarah Abdelnour. In the meantime, maybe Ivana can start.
Yeah, I can start, and I will. Hello again.
She is,
I will
okay.
start by thanking you for your speech and to put so many issues on the table. And I really appreciated the perspective you adopted, because often when we speak about new technologies and the recent labor market transformation, it's all about disruption. And it's all about being everything new and looking at what's new about what's going on. And while I really appreciate your approach based on I think the French longue durée, it's a good approach to look at this kind of phenomena and to put them on perspective, and in particular related your link between platform work and self-employment. I think it's important. I will start by that. I have a lot of questions, so maybe I can ask some question and comment, and so we can have a proper conversation instead of act as a pure discussant. So I will start by that. By asking you about this idea of platform work as a sort of evolution of self-employment. And in particular, looking at the last numbers at European level, you can see that all kind of non-standard forms of work, they are increasing, but they are also changing. In particular, looking at the data, Eurostat data at European level, you can see that non-standard work is increasing, but it's in a way more stable. So all kind of non-standard contracts are increasing in number, but the conditions are in some way, looking at the figures, more stable. So, for example, the kind of contract with the term, they have a longer term than in the past. So looking at the figures, you have more non-standard employment, but a more stable non-standard employment. It's, yeah, it's my idea, I don't know if you share this opinion, is that our numbers, the statistical numbers do not capture a sort of polarization. So what we can see through the numbers is this more stable condition, because number cannot capture all the form of non-standard labor that are, for example, that do not go into our labor statistics. And looking at the labor statistics, we are losing, for example, platform work. And so we do not see a phenomena. We see a phenomena of stabilization. And it's not a stabilization, it's a polarization, but we cannot capture the data, so we cannot see the phenomena as it is. I don't know what you think about that, and if your research shows something that can provide information about that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad to have this interactive discussion with you. And yeah, sure, it's really an issue while working on independent work, the question of the limits of statistic measurement. For one main reason, in France, the statistics are on the main activity. So the most important inquiry from the INSEE, from the National Statistics Institute, l'enquête emploi, it only investigates the main activity. So if you are a part-time delivery worker, you won't appear in the statistics. So we know we have a problem because the way the statistics work was connected to a period of full employment and stable employment, and there are difficulties capturing the independent work. In our research program, we had one researcher, Julien Gros, who is dedicated to this question of statistic measurements, and he actually worked on a new nomenclature, I'm not sure, new classification of workers, in France, where the independent workers are no longer in a separate category, but in each socio-professional category, there will be the employed and the independent. So we'll have a better view of the different, of the social stratification and social ventilation of independent work. But I don't know if the question of multi-activity has been integrated in this new classification. So I'm really, and I think we need more figures also on the turnover in this population of independent workers. For example, for the auto-entrepreneurs, it has been said since 2012 that there is 1 million auto-entrepreneurs in France. But since 2012, we have a hard time knowing which ones are still auto-entrepreneurs and what's the turnover in this population, because they always say 1 million people, 1 million people. But I'm curious about how many French people experienced being an auto-entrepreneur. I think it's much more than 1 million. And on the other hand, half of the auto-entrepreneurs never declare any income. So we have this difficulty. Maybe there are many more auto-entrepreneurs than the million, but also much less, since many of them don't do anything with this regime. So, well.
Yeah, speaking of multi-activities, I think it's important to speak about that because, yeah, we cannot estimate the numbers, but it has a really relevant repercussion on social protection, on a form of trade unionism. For example, trade unionism is based on the principal activity, and people having more than one activity, it's difficult for them to obtain answer for trade union because of the way they are organized now. So I think it's a really important topic, and it's relevant and important to study multi-activities nowadays, even because, at least in Italy, but I think it's the same in France, we have a problem in Italy because every time we speak about multi-activities, we think about the so-called in Italian doppio lavoro, double job of the 80s. And while the doppio lavoro in Italy during the 80s was something completely different from the nowadays multi-activities. So we have also a conceptual work to do in order to better understand what's going on and obtain better social protection and representation. But what's going on now with multi-activities, I think, relate in some way to what you explain about the social justification of auto-entrepreneur. What happened a couple of decades ago about self-employment was not only an increasing number in self-employment, but also a social justification and a way to put people and make the self-employment appealing for people. And the same is happening now with multi-activities. You can see a lot of blog posts, for example, telling people having more than one activity is better for you, not for the market, but it's better for you. And it's exactly the same social justification process we know what's going on a couple of decades ago about self-employment. And I think that studying the two processes together and analyzing the social justification of multi-activities related to the self-employment process, it's really interesting. I don't know if you have any idea and something to add about that.
Yeah, you've said a lot. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, as you said, to see how much with the unemployment, the job opportunities or any income opportunities, because these are not really jobs, this is not employment, but any income opportunity is presented as a miracle for people. Uber is so generous, offering income opportunities for the suburbs youth in France. So it's really interesting to see how jobs are no longer thought under the mechanism of exploitation, and the question of the generation of profit for companies is sometimes totally absent from the discussion. We only talk about how it's good for the workers and not how the companies take profit of this kind of labor. So I think this is quite major. It's a major shift in the social representation of work and the public image of companies. Which is the one interesting thing in this is how did the politician make self-employment attractive? It's interesting because they use social security when they need it. Since the 1970s, Raymond Barre and then Hervé Nobeli. Hervé Nobeli has been fighting the welfare state all his political life. But every time he creates a new device, a new political device, he makes it every device, so the auto-entrepreneur regime comes with social protection, less than the employees. Of course, they don't have allowance when they lose their job, and their pensions are weak. But still, there is social protection, while in the same time, the device totally put in danger the social regime because the contributions are very weak. When Uber makes auto-entrepreneur work for them, almost no one pays social contributions because the company does not. And the auto-entrepreneurs themselves, the first years when they create their company, when they were unemployed before, they don't pay social contributions either. So this is a way of making people work totally separated from the social, from the welfare state and any social contribution. So it's quite a hypocritical use of the social protection to make things more attractive, but at the same time, it totally jeopardizes the survival of this social regime.
We are all researchers, and I will shift now to our point of view and the way we frame as a researcher, but also about the way activism frame this kind of phenomena. So it's not only about how the regulator frame it, how we speak, the public debate frame this kind of discourse, but also the way us as a researcher and as academia, but not only, frame this kind of discourse. And I think that we should do a sort of self-reflectivity exercise in order to see what we are doing. And for example, part of the critique is based on the idea that the new regime, labor market regime, is based on visibility more than on rights and worker rights in particular. So the new visibility regime is really important in the new way of working, for example, based on reputation systems, visibility systems for every kind of workers. So the critique is about the visibility, the processes related to visibility being too important compared to other processes. At the same time, as a researcher, we are doing a lot of research on the more visible jobs, for example, on the platform economy. We are doing research on driver and the delivery sector, and they are the one we can see on our streets. But we know that, for example, in Italy, the numbers show clearly that they are not the most numerous, the most, at least staying in the platform work sector. For example, people cleaning our houses through digital platform, they are more than riders. But as a researcher and the same for activism, we are speaking a lot about riders, and we are not doing research about all other kind of platform workers. So I would like to know if something is going on in France, because in Italy it's not, for example.
Yeah, you are totally right, and we should question ourselves. I'm feeling guilty with what you just said, because actually, yeah, we are studying, well, I am, because not all the researchers who were in the program, I am working on those more visible jobs and more masculine jobs. Because, yeah, these are the sectors where men work, and we tend to keep under the radar the most feminine and domestic jobs. For myself, that was the continuation of my research on auto-entrepreneurs. And my question was the regulations of these new activities. Because while working on the auto-entrepreneurs, I was stunned by the apathy on this subject. Nothing was done by the labor inspectors, nothing was put in place to regulate or just observe these new forms of labor. And what I wanted to do, to look at, was the places where regulations and decisions were being made. So that was kind of logic to go see the drivers, because that was the visible scene and the one which was being regulated by legal decisions, administrative action, political action. But you are totally right, that lives in the dark and a whole spectrum of activities. in our research program, some of the researchers studied home chefs. So they come in your apartment to make dinner for you with your friends. So there are a lot of women here. And Etsy, Anne Jourdain worked on Etsy, so a platform of craft goods that are to be sold on this platform. And she observed a very feminine platform, activities that take place in the domestic sphere during family hours, or that are articulated to the to children custody and care. And she also shows the huge inequalities of income on the platform, because while being a very feminine platforms, the people who make the bigger income on the platforms are men. So it's very interesting. Julien Gros, who I mentioned earlier, was supposed to work on housekeeping activities. For the moment, he just had time to work on the statistic. That was one of the things he wanted to see, and maybe he will work on housekeeping activities. I'm not sure whether they are investigated by other researchers, but I think this question of more invisible and more feminine work will be investigated by young researchers, because there have been many occasions now where I present my work and young female researchers tell me, maybe you don't pay enough attention to feminine and invisible workers. So I think it will be taken care of.
Let's hope so.
We have 20 minutes to go in our dialogue, so that you have an idea of what time is left. And I ask permission to both discussants to ask a question about a particular kind of independent labor, which has been at the center of many discussions during the lockdowns and the pandemic in Italy, which is the entertainment sector, which means theater, movies, culture in general. We are now in the process of having a discussion in the government about a new law about this sector. And obviously France is an important reference for Italy. And I know that in France there has been many discussions about the measures that have been put in place for a long time about the workers of entertainment. So especially when they're not working, which is one of the main points. We don't have anything like that in Italy at the moment. But I know that also in France there has been a big discussion. I don't know if this field is among your interests, but I would like just your opinion as an expert, not as an expert in entertainment, but as a work expert, and in particular about independent workers. And obviously Ivana too.
Yes, in France, I don't know how it works in Italy, but in France we have this particular
intermittence.
Les intermittents du spectacle, who have been studied very well by Mathieu Grégoire, among other researchers. And they study, of course, the mobilizations to defend this regime, since it's under attack every couple of years. So I don't know very well, besides reading Mathieu Grégoire and other researchers, as like Jérémy Simpiaglia also. So I can't say more than them, of course, on this particular regime. What I've been witnessing is the progressive use of the auto-entrepreneur regime by people who dreamed about the regime of intermittent, but could not benefit from it since they didn't have the number of working hours they need to obtain this status. And so cultural institutions use more and more the auto-entrepreneur regime to make artists or work. I've met a theater professor who worked for a city, a commune in France, and he was hoping to enter this intermittent regime, but more and more institutions offered to pay him under the auto-entrepreneur regime, and he could not get the hours to obtain the regime. So that's just one thing I've witnessed is the shift from the intermittent regime to the auto-entrepreneur regime, which is much less interesting for them.
Ivana, do you want to add something? For instance, one of the discussions in Italy is about rehearsals.
Yeah.
I know it seems a small sector, but it's not. It's a big, culture is a big sector, both in France and in Italy and in Europe in general.
It's a big sector, and it's strongly related to the platform work, because at the beginning, the entertainment sector is the idea of gig comes from, we call gig economy because the gig comes from the artistic sector, people performing a gig, and so the idea of intermittence comes from the artistic sector. And in particular, we had the first workers' movement in the platform economy came from the artistic sector, because we had a lot of people doing this kind of jobs and at the same time being drivers, or Uber drivers or something like that. And the relationship between platform work and entertainment, the entertainment sector, is strongly related to the idea of the platform cooperativism. In particular, we had smart at European level, and in Italy also doc servizi, forcing us to see new form of protection of workers, starting from the entertainment sector, and I think it's really interesting because we have to say, Sarah, during her presentation, introduced the idea of social movements and social rights and worker rights and trade unionism. And in the last year, what happened is that the traditional trade unions were very slow in looking at and representing new needs from new kind of workers, but also new way of working, even with traditional jobs. And at the same time, so we had some bottom-up movements, but again, only between riders and not in other kind of platform jobs. And what's really new is the idea of acting, not using voice, but introducing new form of employment organization. So all the platform cooperatives movement is based on the idea, not on the idea of doing voice and ask for more rights, but the idea is we can organize these kind of sectors in a different way. So of course the two are related, but and we can see, for example, doc servizi in Italy is playing an important role, even discussing the new law. So it's a new actor, and sometimes there are conflicts between these new kind of actors, playing also as lobbyists for these workers, and trade unions. So instead of collaborating in order to obtain what both of them want, because in the end they want the same, sometimes we have conflicts between cooperatives and the cooperatives movement in Italy and trade unions. And we can see it very well nowadays in this kind of debate. I know that also in France there is a large debate and practices related to the platform cooperatives movement. Maybe Sarah can add something and tell us what's going on in France.
There was also a researcher in our research program who worked on platform cooperativism. He did his PhD thesis on this, Guillaume Coupin. So it was interesting to compare the whole universe of capitalistic platforms and a few examples of alternative platforms, maybe. But maybe just two things. First, the association, the word, le monde associatif, the sphere, the association sphere. I don't know, I don't think that's a good translation, but the non-profit organization, maybe, in France.
Okay.
They are being transformed through platforms. One of our researchers, also Diane Rodet, studied a platform that's called La Ruche qui dit oui, that organizes.
We have it also in Italy. In Italy it's called, for Italian, so here it's called l'alveare che dice sì.
Sì, okay. Yeah. So you see, it's supposed to be close to the économie sociale et solidaire, social economy, but it's not really, because the people organizing the food sales are in France auto-entrepreneurs. And they get very low incomes compared to the working time they devote to this activity, because they have to look for the place to organize the sale, they have to contact the producers, they organize a lot of things, and they receive a very low income. So we can use very efficiently the conclusions of Maud Simonet, who worked on free labor in the continuity of Tiziana Terranova. She said that there are many forms now of free labor. She uses the analytical frame of domestic labor. And she now investigates all the forms of labor that companies can use without paying. So civic work, workfare, internships, prison labor, and all the forms of labor which can be obtained freely. And each time there's a moral value attached to why we should work without getting paid. And so for La Ruche qui dit oui, it's in the name of a good action, food that has been produced in a good way, and helping people have more ethical ways of buying food and stuff, but every time the work is underpaid and not recognized as work. That was the case for domestic labor. It's not recognized as a labor, and so it can be underpaid or even not paid at all. So that's one thing. It's that the non-profit organizations sometimes use the same organization of the workforce as capitalistic platforms, but still that does not mean that there are not alternatives. we did not see alternatives really be put in place for drivers. During the protests, very often drivers would come and talk to Sophie and I and say, "Oh, I have a project of a cooperative platform," but they never were able to put them in place. It happens more for the bike delivery workers. Yeah. And this is there's a lot to say about this comparison because it's a whole different market structures, different amounts of investment, different social profile of the workers. Where there have, I'm looking forward to a nice article or book that compares bikers and Uber drivers, because I think the possibility of alternatives is different, and there's a lot to understand from this comparison.
Okay, we have the last 5 minutes of our conversation. I'll just ask to Ivana to sum up a little bit, and to Sarah also, and then we'll start the next session.
Okay, I think that we put a lot of issues on the table, and yeah, I cannot summarize them, but I should say that what we can see, even in this conversation, is that the new ways of working are related both to a regulation model and an organizational model. I think that as a researcher, we put our attention mainly on the regulation model. And it was right, because it was the main problem, in particular at the beginning, in order to ask for more rights for workers. And yeah, and I think it was right to put all the attention at the beginning to the regulation model. But nowadays we can say that platforms are more than a new form of contract, but or the lack of a contract. It's more than that. It's more an organizational problem and an organizational issue. And the platforms nowadays are more and more a new forms of organization. So we should continue to discuss the idea, the problems related to the regulation part, but we should add an analysis of the organization and the implication of new way of organizing work. So I think that nowadays platforms are really a new way, and we compare platforms to the traditional way of organizing the relation between economy and society. So in the past, the models used to be markets, hierarchy, networks, and nowadays we have platforms, and they are changing the way we organize the way we work, but also the relationship between the way the customers and the workers. For example, in this debate about platform cooperativism, one of the problems is that through platform cooperativism, you raise the salary for worker, but at the same time, you need to raise the costs for clients. And clients now are used not to pay for the services, and we have new conflicts between customers and clients and workers, and we are at the same time both of them, and there are new conflicts coming from that. In Italy, for example, we have municipalities supporting cooperativism platforms because they cannot stay on the market. And that's one of the problems. Economic sustainability, it's one of the problems. If we want more workers' rights, we need to pay for them, but at the same time, we cannot ask ethical customers to be in charge of all of that. And we are in the middle of this new conflict, and we need a new alliances at societal level and at macro level. So I think that we did a great job studying platform work until now, looking at the dynamics in the single sector, in different sectors, with different workers, but now we need to put all of them together and look at what's going on at societal level and how the platform model will change our societies at macro level. And thanks, Sarah, for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Sarah, do you want to ask something or maybe a suggestion for the tables that we worked this afternoon, starting from your dialogue?
I totally agree with what Ivana just said. I think it was important for a few years to study the condition of those workers and the question of their status. I think now it's pretty well documented, and I think we should go to questions that have been less visible. So we talked about the more feminine and domestic work that's organized on these platforms. I think one of the big questions also is the question of the economic models of these platforms. How do they get funded? Why do they often say in the press that they lose money? Who invests in companies that lose money? Why do they do this? Is it true that they lose money, or is it just fiscal evasion? I don't know. I think this is a big issue, very difficult to investigate, but we should get to that, and public action should go also into that.
Thank you for this last precious suggestion. Thank you very much to Sarah Abdelnour. Let's clap our hands as we still can do it, because we are here all together. This is also something precious that we appreciate, particularly after the period we have lived. Thank you so much to Ivana Pais. Thank you. And I thank also all the people that are here at Fondazione Feltrinelli and the audience that has followed us in live streaming. Now we can interrupt our live streaming, and I remind you that today you can reconnect at 6:30 p.m. for the open ceremony.